You'll never be as good as your brother. Those words had been thrown at me so many times that I could almost mouth them before my parents spoke them. But hearing them again that night, at Thanksgiving, with the entire family gathered around the table, was like pressing a finger into a wound that had never healed. The turkey was still steaming, the pies untouched, but the room went cold the moment my mother looked at me and compared me to him. My name is Eric Lawson, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the shadow in my own family. The quiet son, the one who worked, who sacrificed, who built a life in another city far from home. But to my parents, none of that mattered. To them, the only one worth celebrating was my younger brother. He was the golden child. Sharp suits, expensive cars, stories of big deals and bold ventures. He was the son who took risks, the son who took care of them. I was just Eric, the one who was always compared but never praised. That night, as I sat at the crowded table, I watched my relatives lift their glasses to him. An uncle clapped him on the back and said, "This boy knows how to provide. Your parents are lucky to have you." My mother nodded, pride shining in her eyes, before turning to me with that familiar look of disappointment. "Eric," she said, her voice cutting, "why can't you be a little more like your brother? He's the one supporting us. He's the one we can rely on." Something inside me snapped. I pushed my chair back, the scrape of wood against wood silencing the chatter. All eyes turned to me. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out steady, almost cold. "If that's the case, then let them pay for everything from now on. I won't send another cent." The words hung in the air like smoke. A fork clattered against a plate. My father's brow furrowed. My mother's lips parted in disbelief. The relatives shifted uncomfortably, their eyes narrowing in judgment. They thought I was being ungrateful. They thought I was lashing out at the very people who had given me life. But they had no idea what I had been carrying all those years. No one at that table knew the truth. They didn't know that month after month, while I lived frugally in another city, I sent money back home. 2,000, sometimes 3, pulled straight from my paychecks. Money I could have used to make my own life easier. Money I gave without hesitation because I didn't want my parents to struggle. They didn't know that I trusted my younger brother to deliver that money in cash because he lived in the same town and it seemed easier than teaching my parents about apps and transfers they couldn't handle. They didn't know that every sacrifice I made had been twisted into a lie. And as I stood there, looking at their stunned faces, I realized how much power silence had given them. My silence had allowed my parents to believe a story that wasn't true. My silence had given my brother and his companion room to build a facade of success on money that wasn't theirs. That night, I could have pulled out my phone right there. I could have shown them the statements, the transfers, the notes I left with every payment. I could have burned down the illusion in a single breath. But I didn't. Not yet. Because sometimes the truth needs the right stage. And I knew. Thanksgiving night was only the beginning.
I wasn't always angry. For a long time, I was just invisible. Growing up in our small town, I learned early that in my parents' eyes, I was never quite enough. When I brought home a decent report card, my father would glance at it and mutter, "Not bad, Eric, but look at your brother, straight A's again. You could learn something from him." When I spent hours building a model car out of scrap metal and spare wires, my mother barely looked up before saying, "You should spend your time more wisely. Why don't you join your brother's soccer team? He's out there making friends while you're stuck with useless projects." I swallowed those words like bitter medicine. Every compliment given to him was a reminder of my shortcomings. Every dismissal of my efforts cut deeper than the last. My brother, 3 years younger than me, was born with a kind of charm I never had. Teachers loved him. Relatives adored him. He could walk into a room and within minutes have everyone laughing. And the more he shone, the darker my shadow became. At family gatherings, the pattern was always the same. Someone would ask him to tell a story and he'd captivate the room. I'd sit quietly, waiting for a moment to share something of my own, but the moment never came. By the time I opened my mouth, the attention had already drifted back to him. It wasn't just about personality, it was about worth. To my parents, he was the golden child, brave, outgoing, destined for greatness. I was just Eric, quiet, serious, a boy who dreamed of becoming an engineer but was told that engineers don't get far without charisma. I loved my brother in my own way. I didn't hate him for the attention he got. But every time my parents compared us, every time they reminded me that I was the lesser son, it built a wall inside me. A wall of silence, of distance, of resentment I didn't want to admit even to myself. The comparisons never stopped. In high school, when I landed an internship fixing computers at a local shop, my mother barely reacted. But when my brother won a basketball medal, she threw a small party, inviting neighbors to celebrate his achievement. That night, while everyone cheered for him, I sat in my room staring at the certificate I'd earned, wondering if anyone would ever clap for me. I tried harder. I studied late into the night, earned good grades, and eventually received a scholarship to a university in another city. It should have been my victory, proof that I was capable. But when I told my parents, my mother simply said, "That's good, Eric, but I wish you weren't moving so far. At least your brother will be here with us." Even in success, I was a disappointment. So I left. I packed my bags and built my life miles away. Distance became my refuge, but it also became the perfect excuse for my parents to lean even harder on the younger son, the one who stayed close, the one who could spin stories at their dinner table and make them believe he was the reliable one. And maybe, for a while, I let myself believe it too. But deep down, I knew something they didn't. My brother wasn't the savior they imagined. He was reckless, impulsive, chasing thrills and appearances, and the woman at his side only magnified it. She whispered in his ear, encouraged the show, and together they built a facade so convincing that even my parents couldn't see through it. I tried to warn them. I told them he wasn't what he seemed, but the more I spoke, the more they accused me of jealousy. "Stop trying to drag him down, Eric. Why can't you be happy for your brother?" my father snapped once. Happy for him? That was the moment I realized the truth didn't matter. Not to them. Not yet. And the more they dismissed me, the more I stopped trying. But silence has its own power. And while they celebrated his victories, I was quietly preparing for the day their illusions would shatter.
My parents always said success would speak for itself, and for years, they thought they were hearing it loud and clear from my younger brother. He had grown into a man who seemed to live on a stage. When I came home for visits, I'd see him pull into the driveway with a shiny car, music blasting from the speakers, a new watch glinting on his wrist. He'd step out, grinning like he owned the world, and my parents would rush to greet him as though royalty had arrived. "Look at him," my father would say, pride swelling in his voice. "That's what ambition looks like, Eric. That's courage." I'd stand there, holding my small overnight bag, wearing the same jacket I'd worn for years, and nod silently. Because what could I say? That his ambition was a mask? That his courage was nothing more than a performance? The truth was simple. I had no idea where his money came from. He didn't hold a steady job. His so-called business ventures were always vague, always about to take off. Yet somehow, he always had the latest gadgets, the finest clothes, the kind of lifestyle that screamed success. But I knew he wasn't doing it alone. By his side was a woman who thrived on appearances. She knew how to smile sweetly at my parents, how to drop hints about expensive dinners, how to whisper in his ear when no one else was listening. I watched her closely. She wasn't just part of the show. She was directing it. Every car he flaunted, every party he hosted, every extravagant purchase he made carried her fingerprints. Together, They built an illusion so flawless that even my parents couldn't question it. To them, my brother was the perfect son, the one who stayed close, who sacrificed for them, who took care of everything. And me? I was just the son who called once a week from another city, the one who chose distance, the one who only thought about himself. They didn't see the hours I worked in my small apartment, coding until my eyes ached. They didn't see the overtime I took on just to cover the bills and still have something left to send them. They didn't see me skipping dinners out with coworkers, patching up my old shoes instead of buying new ones, or cutting back on heating in the winter to save money. All they saw was him, the golden son with the golden smile. I remember one visit in particular. I had just wired money to cover some of my father's medical bills, $1,000 I could barely spare. When I arrived at the house, I overheard my mother on the phone with a neighbor, bragging, "Yes, Chase is doing so well. He pays for everything. We're blessed to have a son like him." I stood there in the hallway, my bag still in my hand, listening as she praised him for what I had done. And it wasn't just my parents. At family gatherings, relatives would raise their glasses to him. "To the one who keeps this family afloat," they'd say. And my brother, with his charming grin, would accept the toast, never correcting them, never giving me credit. I wanted to speak up. I wanted to shout the truth. But each time, something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the fear that no one would believe me. Or maybe it was the faint hope that someday the truth would reveal itself without me having to destroy my family to prove it. But I wasn't naive. I saw the way my brother's eyes darted whenever bills came up. I noticed the cracks in his stories, the inconsistencies in his so-called ventures, and I saw the hunger in his companion's eyes, the hunger to keep the illusion alive, no matter the cost. The more they built their empire of lies, the more my parents tightened the chains of comparison around my neck. Why can't you be more like him? Why can't you take risks? Why can't you make us proud? What they didn't know was that every time they spoke those words, they were carving the stage where one day the truth would finally perform. And when that curtain rose, it wouldn't just be my brother standing exposed. It would be everyone who had believed in the illusion. When my father's health began to fail, I knew I couldn't just stand by. Years in the mines had scarred his lungs, and the medications weren't cheap. My mother, stretched thin with bills and her part-time job, was starting to crumble under the weight. I was living 200 miles away in a modest apartment, working long hours in tech. My salary wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And I thought, this is my chance to do something for them, to finally prove I'm not the son they think I am. So I started sending money. Every month, without fail. $2,000, sometimes $2,500. On months when things were especially bad, I'd push it to $3,000, even if it meant skipping meals or cutting corners on my own life. But there was a problem. My parents didn't trust online transfers. My mother said apps were too complicated. My father wouldn't touch a computer unless he had to. I tried to explain, but their eyes glazed over as if I were speaking another language. So I turned to the only practical solution, my younger brother. He still lived in town, a short drive from their house. I thought it would be simple. I'd wire the money to his account each month and he would hand it to them in cash. Clean, efficient. When I called him with the idea, his answer came too quickly, too smooth. "Of course, Eric, don't worry about it. I'll take care of them." And for a while, I believed him. I kept meticulous records, every transfer marked with a note, from Mom and Dad. I thought I was doing the right thing in silence, carrying the burden without seeking recognition. That was my mistake, because instead of delivering the money, my brother let it disappear. And the woman at his side, she knew exactly what to do with it. Designer clothes, lavish dinners, flashy parties that filled social media with photos of champagne glasses and rented cars. Every dollar I bled to keep my parents afloat became fuel for their illusion.
and my parents bought every bit of it. When they talked about how well my brother was doing, their voices filled with pride. "He's so responsible," my mother would say. "He takes care of us. We couldn't ask for a better son." Each time those words reached me, it was like being cut with a dull knife. Because while they praised him, I was living frugally in another city, patching up my old shoes, eating canned soup for dinner, working overtime shifts just to send money that never reached them. I tried to drop hints. I'd ask, "Are things a little easier now? Is Dad's medicine covered?" My mother would sigh. "We're still struggling, Eric, but thank God your brother is here to help." My brother never corrected her, not once. He stood tall, accepted their gratitude, and let them believe the lie. The more they believed, the harsher they became with me. "Why can't you step up like your brother?" my father scolded over the phone. "He sacrifices for us. You only think about yourself." I wanted to shout, "I'm the one sacrificing. I'm the one sending the money you're thanking him for." But I didn't. I kept my silence. Because sometimes silence is louder than any truth. And in that silence, something inside me began to shift. I wasn't just overlooked anymore. I was erased. And I knew, sooner or later, that erasure would have consequences. It wasn't enough for my brother to take credit for what I was doing. At some point, stealing my sacrifice stopped being enough for him, or for her. His companion was always there, whispering in his ear, guiding him like a puppeteer pulling strings. She had a way of turning every conversation, every glance, into a weapon. I don't know if it was greed or pride that drove her, but one thing became clear. She wanted me out of the picture entirely. The lies started small. A cousin mentioned overhearing her say that I had moved on from the family, that I barely called, that I had no interest in helping. At first, I brushed it off as gossip, but soon the whispers spread. At Thanksgiving, an aunt asked me point blank, "Eric, why don't you ever contribute the way your brother does?" I sat there in silence, my chest burning, because if I defended myself, it would only sound like jealousy. Then came the bigger blows. My mother called one evening, her voice sharp with disappointment. "Eric, your brother told us you don't care what happens here anymore. He said you told him to handle everything, that you'd rather keep your money for yourself." My grip tightened on the phone. My money? The same money I'd been sending for months? But before I could explain, she kept going. "You need to think about this family. We raised you better than this." I hung up that night with my ears ringing, the weight of betrayal pressing into my chest. The companion's influence grew bolder. Soon I heard that she'd told neighbors I had abandoned my parents, that I only visited out of obligation. Every rumor spread like wildfire, and the worst part? My parents believed it. The distance between us became more than miles. It became a wall. Calls grew colder, conversations shorter. Their voices carried not just disappointment now, but resentment. The breaking point came one afternoon when I drove back into town for a rare visit. I brought a gift, something small, a framed photo of the three of us from years ago. I thought maybe it would remind them of better times, soften the edges of our relationship. But when I walked through the door, the atmosphere was icy. My father wouldn't look at me. My mother's smile was forced. And then she said it, her voice trembling with accusation. "Why are you here now, Eric? To ease your guilt? You've done nothing for us. Your brother is the one who sacrifices, not you." I stared at her, stunned. For a second, I almost pulled out my phone, almost shoved the proof in her face. But something stopped me. Because in that moment, I realized the truth didn't matter. Not yet. If they could look me in the eyes and say those words after everything I'd done, then no argument, no evidence would change them. So, I swallowed my anger. I set the gift on the table and walked out.
I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I just left. But as I drove away, the bitterness twisted into something sharper. I told myself, let them believe the lie. Let them believe I'm the selfish son. One day, the truth will crush them harder than any denial I could give now. And for the first time, I started to think that maybe they deserved to feel what I'd felt all those years. That maybe silence wasn't just survival anymore. Maybe it was the sharpest blade I had.
Silence became my only weapon. After that visit, after hearing my parents spit words at me that cut deeper than any knife, I stopped trying to defend myself. What good would it do? To them, I was already guilty. Guilty of selfishness, guilty of indifference, guilty of being less. So I let them believe it. Every month, I kept sending money. $2,000, $2,500, sometimes $3,000. Each transfer carefully marked for Mom and Dad. Each receipt saved, tucked away in a folder on my phone. But I never asked if they received it anymore. I already knew the answer. My brother and his companion made sure the lie remained airtight. They gave my parents just enough to keep them convinced, just enough to fuel the illusion that he was their savior. And me? I became the villain of their story. The distant son who didn't care. The disappointment. I stopped fighting that image. In fact, I leaned into it. I let their cold voices roll off me when they called. I endured the looks of pity from relatives who believed the rumors. I stayed quiet when neighbors hinted at how proud my parents must be of the son who stayed behind. Because sometimes silence does more damage than shouting ever could. At night, in my small apartment 200 miles away, I'd sit at my desk and scroll through the evidence. Line after line of transfers, dates, amounts, notes. Proof so clear it could shatter their illusion in seconds. But I didn't send it. I didn't call them to explain. I didn't march into their house demanding apologies. I waited. Because I knew that truth, revealed in the wrong moment, can fall on deaf ears. But truth revealed in the right moment, it can shake the ground beneath someone's feet. So I told myself, not yet. They'll get what's coming to them. All of them. When I said them, I meant it. My parents, my brother, his companion, everyone who laughed while I lived in the shadows, everyone who looked me in the eye and decided I wasn't enough. I whispered it in the quiet of my apartment, almost daring myself to believe it. One day, they'll pay. They'll all pay. And that ambiguity was my shield. Because even I wasn't sure in those moments who I wanted to hurt the most. Weeks turned into months. My brother's social media feeds flashed with more parties, more luxury, more smiles that weren't his. My parents' voices grew colder on the phone, still dripping with comparisons. And me? I stayed the course. I worked, I saved, I sent money. I built my folder of evidence. Until one night, as autumn crept in and the air grew colder, I circled a date on my calendar. A date that had always carried weight in our family. A night when relatives gathered, when the house filled with food and laughter and speeches. A night when appearances mattered most. Thanksgiving. If silence was my blade, then Thanksgiving would be the stage where it finally struck. I didn't plan to shout. I didn't plan to beg. I didn't even plan to accuse. All I had to do was open my mouth at the right time, let the silence crack, and then watch as the truth poured out like floodwater, unstoppable and undeniable. Until then, I waited, quiet, patient, invisible. Because sometimes the greatest vengeance is not in what you say, but in what you don't. Thanksgiving. The house smelled of roasted turkey, cinnamon pies, and spiced cider. Laughter floated from the living room, where uncles told the same stories they told every year, and cousins played cards on the floor. The dining table gleamed with candles and dishes that barely fit across its surface. It was the kind of night that should have felt warm. But for me, every laugh, every smile was another reminder of how far I stood from this family. I sat near the end of the table, my plate untouched, listening as the familiar script played out. Relatives showered my brother with praise. "Chase, you've done so much for your parents," one aunt said, lifting her glass. "We're proud of you." He smiled modestly, glancing at his companion, who squeezed his hand under the table like a director cueing her star. My mother leaned forward, her eyes soft with admiration. "Eric, why can't you be more like your brother? He takes care of us. He sacrifices for this family. You?" That was it. The chair scraped the floor as I pushed it back, the sound slicing through the chatter like a blade. The room stilled. Forks froze halfway to mouths. All eyes turned to me. My heart thundered, but my voice was calm. "If that's the case," I said, "then let them handle everything from now on. I won't send another cent." A gasp rippled across the table. My mother's eyes narrowed, my father's jaw tightened, my brother's companion leaned back with a smirk, as if enjoying the scene unraveling exactly as she had planned. "What are you talking about?" my mother demanded. "You've never sent us anything. Don't insult us with lies." The words stung, but I was ready. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers swiped through the folder I had built over months, years, until the screen glowed with rows of bank statements. I turned the phone toward the table, my voice steady. "Look at this. Every month, 2,000, 2,500, sometimes 3, marked for Mom and Dad, all sent to his account." Gasps turned to murmurs. Heads craned to see the screen. My father blinked, his face pale. My mother's lips parted, trembling. And then I spoke the words I had been saving. It wasn't him. It was never him. And it wasn't you. It was her. And you let it happen. I pointed across the table. My brother froze, his face drained of color. His companion stiffened, her smile collapsing. For the first time all evening, the room fell utterly silent. Aunt Linda, who had just toasted my brother minutes earlier, whispered, "Oh, my God." My father's voice cracked as he turned to Chase. "Is this true? Tell me this isn't true." But Chase said nothing. His hands shook. His companion tugged at his arm, her eyes darted to the door. And then, without a word, they both stood. The silence was deafening as they slipped past the table, heads down, footsteps quick across the hardwood floor. The door opened, then slammed shut. They didn't even look back. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the crackle of candles and the hum of the furnace. Then the whispers began. Relatives staring at me with wide eyes, replaying the lies they had believed, the words they'd spoken against me. My mother's hands shook as she reached for the phone still in my grasp. Her eyes scanned the glowing numbers, the notes beside each transfer. Her lips quivered. "Eric, all this time?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was staring her in the face. My father lowered his head into his hands. For the first time in my life, he looked small, broken. And I stood there, my heart heavy but unyielding. Because vengeance wasn't about shouting or destroying.
It was about letting the truth speak louder than every lie. That night, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand apologies. I didn't gloat. I simply showed them who I had been all along. Weeks passed after that Thanksgiving dinner, but the echoes of it lingered like smoke after a fire. Back in my small apartment, I returned to my routines: work, bills, quiet evenings. On the surface, nothing had changed, but inside, everything had. My parents no longer called to scold or compare. Instead, their voices trembled with regret. My mother once whispered over the phone, "We were blind, Eric. I'm so sorry." My father, proud and stubborn all his life, paused before saying, "I was wrong." Those words should have healed me, and in some ways they did, but the scar was still fresh, and I wasn't sure if time would ever smooth it completely. I kept sending money, this time directly into an account my mother learned to manage, with my help. She struggled with the app at first, fumbling through the buttons, but eventually she managed. For the first time, my sacrifice felt seen. And yet there was an emptiness, because my brother was gone. He had vanished after that night, leaving town with his companion, running from shame and from the truth. No calls, no messages, just silence. Part of me told myself I didn't care. After all, he had betrayed me, stolen from me, let me be branded as the selfish son while he lived off my sacrifice. But silence is heavy, and blood, no matter how strained, has a way of binding itself around the heart. Then, one Sunday afternoon, weeks after the storm, the silence broke. My parents called me. Their voices carried both surprise and hesitation. "Eric," my mother said, "he's here." When I arrived at their house later that evening, I found him standing at the porch, alone. Gone were the sharp suits and designer watches. He wore a plain jacket, his hair unkempt, his face thinner than I remembered. His eyes met mine, and for once there was no arrogance, no mask, only exhaustion and shame. "I left her," he said quietly. His voice cracked. She was using me. She pushed me into everything, and I let her." I didn't respond. I just waited. He swallowed hard, tears burning at the corners of his eyes. "Eric, Mom, Dad, I'm sorry. For all of it. For taking your money, for letting them think I was the one providing, for letting you take the blame. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I don't know how to live with this weight." The silence that followed was unbearable. My parents' eyes filled with tears. My father, once so hard and unyielding, finally stood and placed a trembling hand on his youngest son's shoulder. My mother sobbed, covering her mouth. And me? I looked at him, this brother who had stolen my sacrifices, who had been the golden child all his life, and for the first time, I didn't see the illusion. I didn't see the lies. I saw the boy who used to chase me through the yard with a football, who used to share cookies with me at the kitchen table. It wasn't easy. Forgiveness never is. But in that moment, I knew vengeance had already done its work. The lie was destroyed. The truth had spoken. Now came the part that mattered more: the rebuilding. So I stepped forward, extended my hand, and said, "If you're serious, if you really want to change, then let's start." He gripped my hand like a drowning man clinging to a rope. His tears fell freely, and for the first time in years, I believed him. That night, we sat around the same table where months earlier the lie had shattered. No champagne, no speeches, just simple food, quiet conversation, and the fragile beginnings of trust.
Because in the end, the vengeance I thought I wanted against my parents was never the answer. The real vengeance was letting the truth tear down the walls that had divided us. And in its place, a family, bruised, scarred, but finally honest, began to rise again.